Hello, everyone, and welcome to another X's and Dogs podcast. Today we have a Friday edition of the show. It's going to be kind of a quick podcast today. Not too much to talk about in Browns news, but I did want to start today's show by talking to you guys briefly about some of the doom and gloom that I've seen going on in, other podcasts, other radio shows throughout the Cleveland sports world. Also on Twitter, this seems to be a very common idea currently, to be pretty doom and gloom regarding the Browns head coach search. And I think it all kind of stems from this idea that, the Browns have went this whole entire process now without being able to satisfy the Rooney rules. And my take on that issue is that I think the Browns were actually following the Rooney rules in a way that they're meant to be followed, unlike most teams in the NFL that have been doing a coaching search this year. I think the Browns were legitimately interested in Mike McDaniel and Nate Scheelhaase as two minority candidates for the head coaching position. That's what the rule is designed for. You're supposed to actually consider these good candidates for the position, and I think that's what the Browns were doing in this spot. So I do think I respect them for that, and I think that's the right way to go about doing the coaching search. And I think Mike McDaniel kind of threw a wrench into things when he backed out from the second interview, which was going to be the in-person interview, which would have satisfied one of the two candidate requirements for the Rooney Rule, but I think more importantly would have also been a good candidate for the Browns, and I think that's kind of disappointing on both ends there for the Browns. And I think, like I said, that really put a kind of a wrench into their plans for the coaching search. Similarly, Nate Scheelhaase, they really seem to like this guy. He's my top candidate right now. I want the Browns to hire Nate Scheelhaase. I think him and Grant Udinski are clearly the favorites. I think you can lump Jim Schwartz in there as well. In my eyes, Jim Schwartz would be a little bit of a settle. I've been very open on this show that I want the team to take a risk on a candidate like Udinski or Scheelhaase. And I'll return to that topic in a second, but I wanted to shift back to the Nate Scheelhaase conversation. The Browns do have interest in Scheelhaase. Like, they're not doing what other teams tend to do and just kind of check the boxes on these Rooney Rule requirements. So, yeah, like to me, Scheelhaase is probably the best candidate for the Browns at this point. And hopefully he'll come in, he'll get an interview. That'll check one of the boxes. Then we can, from there, figure out how to satisfy the rest of the rule. And I think, people are overestimating the difficulty of that. There are plenty of good candidates out there that the Browns can schedule an interview with. Maybe Andrew Berry has a relationship with them. Maybe Jimmy Haslam has a relationship with them. Maybe, somebody else in the organization has a relationship with some of these guys and they can just do them a favor. Also adds to these guys' resume. I think we kind of underestimate the impact that having these interviews and the knowledge and the reputation and the relationships you build from completing these interviews. We just think that on the surface level, they don't have a chance to actually get the job, which I understand that argument, and that's why I think the Rooney Rule has its flaws for sure. But, there are still benefits to completing these interviews for the candidates themselves. And, that said, I think the Browns are going to be able to do that pretty easily when they want to do that. I would expect it probably in the next day or two, or early next week after the Shieldhouse interview. I think everyone at this point kind of is under the assumption that the Browns are wanting to hire either Grant Udinski or Jim Schwartz, and so they don't really see the point of delaying the inevitable at this moment. But I'm someone who actually thinks the Browns are heavily considering Nate Shieldhouse for the position, and they want to have a real interview with him. So, of course, they're not going to just hire Grant Udinski right away. And maybe this sounds crazy, and by tomorrow, the Browns somehow are hiring Grant Udinski, however that may occur. But I just don't see that being the case. And that said, I think we all just need to take a deep breath and understand that the Browns will get this sorted out. I was someone who had questions about this head coaching search just a few days ago, but I think the more I've thought about the process, the more I've come to the understanding that it makes a lot of sense for the Browns to be in the position they are. And here's what I mean by that. The apart from Jim Schwartz, and honestly including Jim Schwartz, the two candidates that the Browns are considering are very young guys who other organizations and teams have really not expressed much interest in. Shieldhouse, I think, has an interview with Pittsburgh, but I think Pittsburgh clearly has other candidates that they have expressed more interest in. Similarly with Udinski, he has the interview with Buffalo that we all kind of freaked out about, but I find it very, very hard to believe that Buffalo, at this point where the pressure they have in that organization to go out there and win an AFC, win the AFC and go to the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl, I find it hard to believe that they're going to hire a 30-year-old coach for that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they similarly love the guy and they want to hire him, but I find that to be much more unlikely than hiring a guy like Joe Brady in-house or bringing back Dable or something like that. I think we, as Browns fans, tend to think worst case scenario in these situations and tend to panic. But I think just take a step back, look at the situation, understand these are guys who are not super sought after. They will be risky candidates if we do hire them, which makes sense for the Browns being in the position they are where they don't have an expectation to win games next year. It makes a lot of sense to take the risk on these guys. I think the Cardinals are kind of there too. They're not going to be in a position to win a ton of games. They're probably going to be willing to take a risk on a young guy. But the thing is the Cardinals aren't interested in any of the same candidates that the Browns are. They have a completely separate list. The Steelers, I just don't see them hiring Shieldhouse. I think Flores is a great option for them. I think that's probably who they're going to end up going with. I know he has agreed to a deal with the Vikings, but if the Steelers still offer him the head coach position, he can obviously take that because it's an upgrade. But all that said, I just think as Browns fans, following the situation super closely, I understand it. But I think, as we get super bogged down in this day-to-day stuff with this coaching search, we kind of get too in the details. We need to just take a step back, look at the whole thing, understand that this is a process. We're reaching the end of it, and I think we all want answers. I understand that. But those answers will come. We will have a coach of this team. It may be Jim Schwartz. It may be Grant Udinski. I think there's a great chance that both of those guys are considered. And similarly, it might be Nate Shieldhouse. We'll find out soon. I think by mid next week, we will have a good idea of what direction the Browns are going in. So everyone just needs to take a second, relax, let the process play itself out. I wouldn't be worried about the Rooney Rule. Like, the team knows how to satisfy these conditions that need to be satisfied, and they will do it. Just let them go through their process. Now, the next thing I did want to move to talk about today, and it's probably going to be the last thing, because other than that, there's not really much Browns news going on. we're kind of in the period where we're starting to look at the East-West Shrine Bowl, which I think is going on this weekend. Then also into next week, we'll have the Senior Bowl. So we're really moving into some of the draft stuff. We'll have more to talk about, obviously, as we get more information with all of that stuff. But before then, we're kind of just living in this coaching search world, which we've been talking about ad nauseum for the past couple weeks here. And, I think we're all just kind of overthinking this thing because of the trickle that's been going on, the slow trickle. So we don't have a ton else to talk about. Apart from the Baker Mayfield tweet, I did want to briefly touch on the Baker Mayfield situation. And I want to start by making a couple notes. First off, I think it is an important note that Baker finished the season the way he did, which, if you take a sample of like his last 8 games of the year, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in starting in the NFL. That's just statistically a fact. You can say what you want about Baker. I get it. He has looked really good at times in Tampa Bay, but as of recent, that's not been the case. He did not finish the season very, efficiently. And also, of course, Tampa Bay, they weren't even able to win that really bad division. So that's an important note, because I think whenever things are going well for Baker, he acts very differently than when there's some hardship there. That's an important note. Also, Kevin Stefanski has I don't even think the words Baker Mayfield have come out of his mouth in years. He made zero comment whatsoever about Baker Mayfield. I'm sure Kevin saw this whole entire situation, and I'm sure Kevin has some regrets with what happened with Baker. As any human would, he was still a very new coach at the time. But, the words Baker Mayfield never came out of his mouth. He never made a tweet about him. I mean, who knows what he says behind closed door, but I'm sure Kevin's not bashing Baker Mayfield behind closed doors either. So those are important notes, because I think both of those play into kind of the background of what occurred. So Baker goes on Twitter, and there was a Falcons beat reporter, I believe, that made a tweet saying that essentially Baker had failed in Cleveland, which on the surface, yes, that I understand why Baker would have made the tweet saying that a fail is a stretch, because the statement saying that Baker did fail in Cleveland is a stretch. He brought the team to the playoffs. He had a really good rookie season, tied the rookie touchdown passing record. Obviously wasn't a failure in Cleveland. Did it end well? No, but he had a lot of success here at times. So that makes sense to make a tweet like that. But then he lumped in the part where he bashed Kevin Stefanski, saying that he was still waiting for a call or a text. And also the part where he's looking forward to seeing him a couple times a year. So it just, I think he took the tweet way above where it needed to be. I think leaving it on the part where he was kind of clapping back to the reporter that tweeted that it was a failure in Cleveland, that makes sense to me. He also wouldn't have gotten much pushback from anybody for making that tweet. But, whenever you add on this kind of bash to Kevin Stefanski, who has not said or done anything negatively, to impact Baker for years and years, just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Also, the other thing I want to mention is, by all accounts, and the national media doesn't seem to have a good grasp on this, because I've heard people like Nick Wright and some people on First Take and shows like that talk about the situation, and I think they just don't have a good understanding of what actually occurred, or they've maybe forgot about what actually occurred in Cleveland when Baker left. So the timeline was the Browns were exploring other QB options like any team would. Deshaun Watson was on the market, which is just not a common occurrence. Of course, the Browns explored that option. Baker Mayfield requested a trade because of that. Like, he could not handle the fact that the Browns were looking for upgrades, which it's the NFL. This is what teams do. He was coming off a very, very bad season, and which meanwhile was his second disappointing season. So it's not like he had played great every year up to this last one, then he was hurt, and then things went south. No, he had a bad year, bounced back in 2020, and then had another really bad year. So it made a lot of sense for the Browns to explore other options. Baker, obviously, like I said, couldn't handle it, reacted very negatively to that. By all accounts, what happened was the team was trying to get in contact with Baker over and over again, and Baker just wasn't picking up the phone. He did then request that trade. And we all know what occurred after that. You know, the Browns were able to then get Deshaun, Baker left, etc. So by all accounts, to me, what seemed to have happened was Baker couldn't be a professional about the fact that a team was willing to move on from him after a couple of really bad years. And, you know, then he goes to Tampa Bay after the whole learning experience that he talked about, and he's, you know, seems to be religious, seems to have a family, which is all great. Like, I'm not bashing the guy for any of that. I think that's all fantastic for him. But, you know, I think it's so easy for us to say that. I think the public view of Baker really became very positive after last year. But the key is this: look at the way he played last year. He played like a top 10 quarterback. He played fantastic. He was really good. And so I think it was really easy for him to come across as this very likable guy, and he's performing well, and look at what he's done. He moved out of the bad situation in Cleveland, went to Tampa Bay, found success, etc., etc. Then he has kind of a down year, which the guy is hit or miss. He's been that his whole entire career. He'll continue to do that. He has a down year, and oh look, he starts to revert back to the same habits that he swore he grew out of from his time in Cleveland to now. You know, I think Baker Mayfield is just Baker Mayfield. He has the personality he has, and sometimes he makes decisions that I just cannot agree with. For example, making this tweet, and I think he has that fiery personality, and there's positive and negatives to that. This, to me, is a clear negative, but that's just my take on the situation. I think the whole thing just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the bottom line for me is, if he would have stopped that tweet after the part where he disagreed with the failure comment, I would have been perfectly okay with it. I don't think it would have gotten really much publicity. But, of course, he took it to the next level. And, you know, at the very minimum, we will have some intrigue in the two games between the Falcons and the Buccaneers next year, which I'm sure we'll all be watching, as we have a couple very important previous Browns members on both of those teams, obviously. That's all I wanted to talk about in today's podcast. Let me know what you guys think about the dramatic coaching search here in Cleveland, as well as the Baker Mayfield comment. Some rather interesting things going on there. I will continue to be making content for you guys as we find out more about the Browns coaching search, and, you know, hopefully more about some draft talk too, and, you know, as we progress into the hopefully warmer weather in a couple months into the draft, because I know here in Cleveland, Ohio, we are going through what is a extremely cold weather spree, and we have a big snowstorm coming this weekend. So everyone stay safe, stay warm. I will talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.